Just when you thought you had seen it all, something new is waiting.
You've read about it. You've heard about it.
Prepare to be pulverized, traumatized, and hospitalized by...
Part 3. It's exactly what you think it is.
Does that sound entertaining?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's watch party for our In Search of Darkness community. I, as always, am Andrew, and our guest today is the fantastic Rob Mclaughlin. Say hello, Rob.
Hi, guys. Hope everybody's okay.
Good.
We're doing good. Everybody's good. Fantastic.
Excellent, excellent. So, Rob, you're on because you're a bit of an expert on this week's movie, I believe, Poltergeist, the 1982 version. Not the
not the new version. We should best not talk of that one, shall we?
Yes. Exactly.
My name's Rob Mclaughlin. I'm a lecturer in film, TV, and media, and I wrote a book for a company called CREATORVC, which is part of Liverpool University, and it's come out for kind of devil's advocate line of books, which comes out next year. And I wrote a book on Poltergeist. So a lot of research, a lot of background bits and pieces, trying to unpick what's real, what's fake, what the curse was, what the curse isn't. The themes and the ideas behind it, the idea of kind of Ronald Reagan in the beginning of the 80s, both at the same time, all the fun facts and the ideas and the quirky bits and pieces that go along with the movie. So a bit of academia, but mostly kind of trivia, because that's the more fun bits and pieces that people enjoy. Where is that a real body? Is that a real skeleton? Is that all those kind of things. So I spent a good couple of years researching that as much as I can do. So hopefully, as we go through, I can pick some bits and pieces out and go, can you see that wire? All those kind of things that hopefully we can discuss and talk through as we go through the entire movie.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Just to say to everybody, our sync point will just be as the MGM line roars. So that's when we'll get going in just a moment. So, Rob, just before we start, can you explain? I mean, there's a guest. The question I always start off with, I guess, usually, when was the first time you saw Poltergeist? Can you give us your introduction to this movie?
Far too young, I think, is probably most people are, and it's this and Jaws, isn't it? I think this is the ones that gets them. I'm 47. I'm over a certain age where I've grown up on video, but I also grew up pestering my parents to watch films I shouldn't have done. So there was a guy with a video van, and of course there was things passed around at the time when they shouldn't have been passed around. And there's an insistence as a 8 or 9 year old going, I really into this film. I really into this film. Friends at school are talking about this film. They've all seen it, of course. Hadn't, and they hadn't seen Jaws either, but it was this and Jaws. These are the two ones that I think scarred warped my fragile little mind, and I think Poltergeist was the film I think that scared me most. And there's still bits in it that creep me out, and I'll when we go through the movie, there'll be certain things I don't like this bit. And even now, watching it nearly 40 years on, because it's the 40th anniversary next year, there's still bits that I think are unnerving. There's still bits that are disturbing, and there's the right bit that to just. The best way to put it is a tequila worm in the ear, and ear worms and tequila worms. And there's a scare worm. There's a worm just niggles. There's something just underneath the skin that still gets me every time I watch it. And there's still, it's the music and it is, and I think it's childhood trauma. Growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, there's a lot of kinder trauma involved in that kind of area, and this is just part of the kind of the scares of video nasties and watching Doctor Who and all the melty bits and pieces. That Doctor Who was very melty in the 80s, and all those kind of horrible things that were around in the 80s, and all the kind of the fear and Scar Folk, all the things that you may not see on the Scar Folk kind of videos and contents of that bizarre kind of time, late 70s, early 80s, a lot of rabies and all these things, just all these little bits and pieces. And
it was depressing.
It was not a happy time, was it, to be honest? So
yeah, it really wasn't. But let's carry on in just a moment. Let's get the movie going. So if everyone is ready to press play on the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Press play. So, Rob, you had a video van man too, like I had.
Yes,
we had a dodgy man with his estate car with milk crates, videos in the boot.
Yeah, and there was the real ones and the legitimate videos, and there's also the ones that probably weren't quite as legitimate, and the things that we saw and watched maybe we shouldn't have seen, and they were usually generational copies that we probably shouldn't have got through at the time.
Are you saying that the proprietor of your video van, very much like the one I experienced, was not the most stringent enforcer of age ratings?
No, he was neither the stringent of age rating or indeed of copyright issues either, to be honest. Right. I think a lot of the things that he had was like, is that kind of, I'm sure there's not going to be that many lines, or I'm sure that Disney, when they produced that movie, did not make it to have the tracking completely out in many ways. So, and probably didn't have 2 films on one video cassette either, because that's how it worked. And I think the 80s, as I said before, was this very wild time when things weren't always done legitimately and above board, and they weren't done, should we say, in the way that things are done now. That's not as quite stringent as things were. So we've got this kind of this time that I grew up in, where we did see things when you shouldn't have seen things. And you did see movies like Poltergeist and Jaws and Extro, which is a great movie that I really enjoy.
Extro.
That's a great movie.
Extro. We have one of our members of staff, Dom, who's a huge Extra fan. Just seeing something on screen in the movie now that some of our younger viewers may not remember, but I remember this. In the UK, it was basically the same thing. We didn't have, of course, the American anthem, but we had God Save the Queen. We played on the BBC channels every night before they switched off.
That's it. Go to bed spotty, essentially.
That's right.
That's a young one's reference. It's like, right. You can't tell me when to go to bed. Yeah. And it was how it was. We were told and dictated to go to bed at a certain time because they haven't closed down. And now you don't get closed down. Now it just becomes 24/7. And even if you're watching Cartoon Network and think it's 24/7, it just goes on and on and on. But that's it. There's a limited amount of TV you can watch, and that's how much you can watch in a day. You're not getting any more TV, guys. So that's it. Tough. And it is, and America is exactly the same. And watching people go to sleep in front of the TV, that's not something we kind of do particularly anymore. No. It's usually in front of our phones or tablets nowadays, rather than in front of the TV. But having the TV on, it just becomes a very 80s trope. This idea of something just being on in the background and the background noise happening all the time. So
we can see here that they're quite a well-to-do, probably family, quite the middle class, but quite well off. They've got quite a nice house, quite a spacious house. They've got 2 large TVs in the house, which would quite a statement.
Which would have cost a lot of money. The house, the affluent area that they go to, is again my idea of a perfect 80s time. It is again me growing up when I did, and I grew up in the Midlands near Birmingham, and it's a nice place to live. But to me, this is the perfect Americana. This is 1980s America. This is where I wanted to be as a kid. It's sunny. It's big. They've all got BMXs. They're all going to go out with their friends and find an alien, which is of course where ET is. And
it's very ET. I mean, the opening of the film, when we get to it in a moment, where we see the sort of the panoramic shots of the neighborhoods, etc. You could believe that round the corner the whole stuff with ET and Elliot was going on this estate. And
the next little cul-de-sac along, there will be Gertie and Elliot playing about, because it's exactly the same. It's the same set. Realistically, it's the same people who are producing the film, and it's really about the same time that the film was being made. That Spielberg was working on both at the same time. So he was obviously working on ET and working on this at the same time. And I'll come on to this obviously a little bit later on, to who actually directed the film and things. But there's enough evidence, I think, even if you're just watching this, to just see there's so much Spielbergian Americana in this, and he loves this. He loves this idea of kind of conformed communities and middle classes, and it harkens back to the 1950s. It goes back to him wanting this perfect idea: white picket fence, nuclear family, and you can kind of see it as the film goes through. These are the houses that people aspired to want to do. They want to move out of the cities. They wanted to move out of big kind of clustered and busy areas, and these were built in the late 70s and early 80s to accommodate the fact that white working middle class people wanted to go and live with other white working class middle class people, which is exactly what we get. So
exactly. Also, I should just say for our audience, if anyone's photosensitive, we probably should say this at the start of the movie. Please take care watching this movie with us tonight. There's a lot of
TV flickering and a lot of static, which is shown and stuff as well. So it's a film that does use the media of TV well, and the media of static and things as well.
Exactly. But I mean, this is one of those. I don't want to say picture postcard, but it's one of those. It is a properly developed, perfect community.
Yeah, it's artificial, I think, and I think that's one of the things that Toby Hooper puts in his movie is the fact that underneath the picture postcard beauty of beauty in a kind of very aesthetic way of seeing it is the tree that's in the middle of the road and things. You get the fact that they've actually kept some of the nature around. But you scratch the surface, and there's no sense of real community there. Particularly, there's no history, there's no context. It's just street after street after street, repetition, and there's no history to it. There's no depth of community. There's no sort of yes, of course, there's family values and things, but it's nothing that has any depth to it. There's nothing here that's it's artificial. It's created, and again, spoilers. There's a reason why the poltergeist exists, but it's just that it's just leveled over and built upon, and it's just mass produced in a certain way.
Exactly. And this now we're in a wonderful score by Jerry Goldsmith, of course. But I think he's very much almost channeling a little bit of like a bit of John Williams on this bit, kind of a very jolly kind of piece.
Yes, it's very happy. It's very nice. It's a lovely score, and I must admit I've got it on CD as well, because it does get creepy, but the sense of happiness and sun and shared stuff when they're watching a football match and things, and all these kind of ideas that are it's hot, it's humid, it's sunny. It's a lovely family environment. It's designed to be to put in a false sense of security for things that are going to come in the future, I guess. But the score's good. It's one of the better scores, I think, of the time. Again, we're looking at E.T. We can't help but talk about this and have parallels with E.T. And both of those have got amazing scores, and they both sum up again this amazing time in the early 80s, and they both sum up kind of the idea of kind of America before it gets a bit horrible and before it gets all recession.
It really is, but it's also very 80s though. I think we just saw the daughter eating that 80s diet staple of a bowl of cottage cheese with some celery.
Yeah, there's people question that scene because there's a couple of suggestions that Dana is not quite as young and as innocent as she makes out to be, and people have read into that scene the fact that she's eating gherkins and cottage cheese, that maybe she might be pregnant. There's a potential there that because potentially that she may well, and I think if you've seen the film enough and you pick up the bits and pieces, the fact that they go off at the end of the film, not to spoilers, they do survive at the end, so I have to do that, but they go off and they discuss a motel, and Dana's been to that motel before, and they go, and it's just a very, very quick throwaway line, and she discusses the fact that she may have been there before, and she's young. But also another throwaway line is the fact that the family are young, and it seems a repetition of a very early pregnancy, and it's something that
it really is. I mean, later on in the movie, something to watch out for is I picked out today. The mother is 32, I believe.
She's really young.
32, and the daughter is 16. So again, that would, as you say,
and again, the way I've always put in the book is the fact that the way that the family has moved, it's through necessity. That going back 15, 16 years from 81, it's going to be late 60s. So what you've got then is a family having to go, let's do good and do well. And Steve marries, and probably marries too young, but they've doubled down on the fact that they've lost a lot of their youth, I suppose, in the best possible way, but have also made up for the fact that they've really he's made a lot of money. He's been working for 15, 16 years, and has got a very nice house, and one of the only guys that can afford a pool on the estate, and probably went to work a lot earlier than a lot of people who didn't go to college and things like this. So
our Discord community are wonderful, giving us facts. Two of our producers, Sparky John and Carla, have just stated apparently Diane is the oldest daughter's stepmother. The novelization clarifies that Diane is Steve's second wife, and that Dana is actually Diane's stepdaughter. That explains the 15-year age difference between the two of them. So that's the film went one way and the novelization goes in another direction.
The novel's actually quite good. There's a lot more in the novel, obviously, than in the film. There's a really interesting element to do with the birthday party, which is quite creepy, which I think would have been take a lot to discuss. And there's also a few changes of characters and a few sort of variations of bits and pieces in that. But obviously, there's a little bit more detail about the creatures and the poltergeists and things as well, and a lot more to do with the parapsychologist and Lesh, and that team had come into it a bit later on. But that's an interesting one, because of course, if you hadn't read the books and you hadn't read the novelization, which came just after this, you wouldn't have picked that up. And I think, again, just taking it purely as a film, that does seem not to build on the mythology, I don't think, but really kind of just to answer that question, because it is something people have picked up on before, the fact that there's a significant age similarities, I think, between Dana and but then there's other things that later on they talk about going to college and things as well.
I mean, if we jump to the sequel, spoilers, because anyone's not seen the sequel, it's inferred that Carol Ann and her mother's bloodline have sort of psychic abilities of nature, which would maybe explain why potentially Dana wouldn't have been involved in it, wouldn't have been if she wasn't in the mother's bloodline, effectively.
Yeah, it's not something I'd really thought about before, but completely agreed that there's a psychic link between the grandmother, who, again, spoilers, that helped them out at the end of the movie, and Carol Ann, and when she gets taken to the side. But yeah, it's right, when she goes and grabs the ball of wool and knows exactly what colour and stuff it is as well. So it doesn't help in the third film at all. All those powers seem to disappear, particularly. I shouldn't say I dislike the third movie, but it's very difficult to watch in many ways. One, because Julian Beck isn't in it, and he's as creepy as anything in the second movie, but also because all the mythology goes out of the way. It's like, we can't deal with this. She can go and live with her aunt and uncle somewhere else. To be honest, we've had enough of Poltergeist. It's like, even the original crew, for the majority of it, aren't in it and stuff. And there is some nice effects in it, and there's some nice bits and pieces, and the use of mirrors, and some good use of kind of ice and frost, and some very nice effects and things like that in it. But it just doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the movie at all. So.
No, we've got Matt saying how much celery had to be eaten during retakes. But the good news is celery is one of the few foods that is actually calorie negative, if not neutral. So it should be all right there. Also, something I like to do occasionally is, from a technology point of view, explain how certain things work in the movie. Some people may be wondering how they are able to change each other's televisions with a remote control, even if they're not pointing directly with line of sight at them. A lot of televisions of that era actually used RF-based remote controls rather than infrared. So they used actually like a radio frequency that could be transmitted. So the television, so you didn't even have to point the remote control directly at the television. Some devices still have these remote controls. You'll know if you've got one, if you have a remote control when you point it at the DVD player, the TV, etc. And you don't have to actually point it directly at it. If you can point it directly or cover the end of it, pointing away from it, that's an RF remote control, and that's what we've been seeing there.
So it's the thing. I just quite like that. The idea is just that the remote control battle is quite good and quite good fun, and it's not something we've ever had. But I mentioned that happens occasionally. I've turned my TV in my other room on with my remote control, but I've never had my next door neighbour moan at me for watching horror movies at 9 o'clock on a Sunday for people to change things. No. But it's and these bits and pieces of the technology. Again, when we see all the video cameras a bit later on, and the use of technology is expensive. And Andrew mentioned before the idea of having 2 TVs in a house. These are big TVs. They're not little small bits and pieces. And technology and tech, it's a big thing in the 80s. It's a show of extravagance in many ways. It's a show of how much money we've got. I mean,
it is. Sorry, I just want to say something for a second while we're looking around the son's bedroom here. I would almost believe that Disney have time travel at some point in the future here, because if you look, his bedroom is kitted out with everything on point with properties Disney owns that were disparate at the time. He has Star Wars posters, Star Wars everything. He has an Alien poster, which is Fox.
It's odd.
He's reading Marvel comics.
He's got Captain America comic. And I wish I'd find out what that issue is. It'd be nice to see what that is. But it's but having why is he seeing aliens? In the best possible way. Alien, which is even earlier. Yeah. But why has he got that in his film? Because again, I watched this when I was far too young. He's not going to have seen Alien. Really,
I don't know. We're cutting to a scene of his parents smoking pot in the bedroom, so maybe they're quite liberal.
They're quite liberal. And again, they probably had a guy with a video van where they lived as well. That's so the guy at the beginning with this little BMX carrying other beers, maybe it's that guy, and he does all the dodgy videos. Again, something we don't see this in films at all now. We don't see people smoking in films particularly. We don't see people smoking weed in films particularly, and also both of them, not one of them, it's both of them, quite happily taking recreational drugs at home, and it seems a very liberal thing to do. I mean, the irony being, of course, is one of reading a book at the same time, which is factoring the idea of veganism and conservative to small c, being these are things we shouldn't be doing. We should have a happily married nuclear family, and people shouldn't be smoking or drinking or fornicating, all these kind of bits and pieces. And what will people think of the children? It becomes very Flanders-esque in its way of thinking in the 80s, especially Flanders' wife. But it's odd that the fact that they've got this huge big discrepancy between watching and reading his Reagan book and them smoking. So of course they are children of the 60s and 70s. They've grown up with free love and free kind of ways of thinking, and very kind of liberal ways of thinking. And they don't know in a few years' time things are going to change, unfortunately. But it's kind of interesting that Reagan hasn't quite got into power yet. The conservative Bible Belt hasn't quite gripped America just at this early time in the 80s. So there is this still a little bit of kind of the 70s bleeding into the 80s. It's not quite gone to the suburban films that we all know and love from Gremlins and the kind of 80s that we going back to the future-esque 80s. It's still not quite there yet. So there's still a little bit of kind of the sort of 70s thought and feeling about this. And again, smoking in bed before going to sleep. It's not great. It's an interesting idea. That again, it's not even covered. It's not even.
I think they're a bit torn as well. Even the bedroom scene, I think they're a bit torn in their personalities. And there's quite a nice little clue there. One side of it, there is quite a posh clothes rack with his shirt and trousers hung out for the next morning, ready to wear on there. Yet there's actually a shirt hung on a lampshade as well, casually thrown on it as well. So it's a bit of both.
It is. It's an interesting couple, and I think we'll see this more and more, and probably discuss Spielberg's opinion of family. But they're equal. He's very logical. He's very down to earth. He's very She's quite spiritual. She's kind of, again, we find that she's going to be very free spirited and kind of slightly more hippie-esque. But you can kind of see this idea that they work in sync and work in tandem. She's the one, again, spoilers, that goes to the side. She's the one that touches the spirituality. Oh, there we go. We know what's coming next, and it's the clown. But we'll come on to him in a minute.
We do. Yeah. I just want to say as well, there's actually yet another, I think my Disney theory is getting stronger. We're now seeing Sesame Street stuff in there. Again, Disney owns Sesame Street. This is,
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. We've got a Toys R Us. It's a shame Disney didn't buy Toys R Us either, to be honest.
That's about the only thing they didn't.
They didn't go, yeah. But a clown. That's how you get it so wrong in the next film. And again, it's why I don't like the original. And I've written a paper recently about why the original has its positives, but I really don't like the original. My apologies, the remake. The original is far better. And they just it's the thing that they get wrong. This will scare you. It's just a clown. It's fine, and it works in this movie because it works in the context of this movie, but it doesn't work because he's a scary clown. We've seen that all before, and this is the time when the clown, the cloudophobia, the fear of clowns wasn't quite as big, and we didn't have quite as much of a fear of them. They haven't become part of kind of the lore of horror. Same as the kind of little dolls' heads that move.
Oh, I love his. I love the fact he's got a C-3PO light switch cover in his room.
That is great. The fact that he's the most 80s kid ever. It is. Again, if I had his bedroom, it'd be the best bedroom in the world. It's just a great bedroom to have.
He's got a speak and spell behind them on the shelf there. It's a very accurate 80s kids bedroom. I would say it's more accurate than the kids of. All right, this was made in the 80s, but it's a real 80s kids bedroom as opposed to what we see in Stranger Things, for example, which is a supposed 80s kids bedroom, or an It in the recent It films, supposed 80s kids bedroom. Yeah,
and it's I would say even so much more in Ready Player One. It's the artificialness, and again, I'm not a huge fan of Ready Player One because it's it's somebody who's been told, in my way, it's Chinese whispers of geekdom. It's the fact that myself and yourself, we talked before we came online about films that we loved, and we mentioned Roger Corman and Battle Beyond the Stars, and we can talk about that forevermore. But it's because we've lived it and loved it, and we've watched it on video. But I see Ready Player One as being something that somebody's heard of, that this thing was in Atari, or this thing was a really good film, or this thing was a really good comic book. So therefore, I'll tick a box, and it's in there. Look, as a bit of a nod to the guys who are there. But I bet he's never watched the variations of Gundam, and has probably never watched anything to do with Neo Genesis Evangelion, or kind of all these bits and pieces that are there in those movies. I can't see him being a guy who's actually gone through and watched all those things and knows and loves them. But I think it's
I don't mind Ready Player One, but I think for me, from my geekdom side of things, the show I never really could connect with would be Big Bang Theory. And the reason for that being is I didn't find from my geekdom it was real geekdom. It's what people thought geekdom was.
This is exactly the same. That most geeks, myself included, are not that geeky in the best possible way. We are we are geeky, but we are not geeky to the fact that we are not. We don't need to have a kind of doctorate or win to be Leonard or to be geeky. And it's right. It's look how geeky they are. It's like, no, it's not. That's not true. People like horror. I like science fiction. But at the same time, they might like football, or they might like cricket, and might like whatever. So it's part of everybody's makeup. It's not just that doesn't define you. It doesn't define what it is. Yes, admittedly, I've got a Ghostbusters t-shirt on today, but it doesn't. That isn't my life. That isn't what I do. I still only go to Tesco's and things, and that's one of the things that Big Bang Theory didn't do right. They weren't rounded people. They were just defined as stereotypes in many ways. And coming back to this is exactly what these are people. There's nothing scary that's happened. The film's 20 odd minutes in, for the best part, and nothing scary has happened. You get to know and establish characters, and this is something that Spielberg does very well. That he establishes people. These are rounded people. These are kids in bed with their parents. These are kids that are scared, and this is not just an artificially created. Again, I'm going to use Stranger Things. It's what we think the 80s were through somebody who didn't live in the 80s, and this is, again, my apologies. The fact is me being in my parents' bed after watching this film, because I was scared to death of this film when I was about 8 or 9. And it's my own fault, because I pestered my parents, because I did, and my parents caved in because they did, and the end result was the fact that I spent the night in there, and they got a bad night's sleep, and it's everybody's fault. But that's how people were, and this is how this family is, because this is a family, and the acting is natural. They're not artificial people. It's maybe some of the lines are ad-libbed, and maybe there's some of the lines are kind of changed again and again. But these are people who are actors because they're natural, because it works. It's not a hyper reality. Yes, it's a Steven Spielberg movie, and by that very nature, it's artificial. But it is a family that work together, and you'll see it in a few minutes' time when they're at the dinner table, and the kids are bickering. And again, it's the same as when you watch E.T. and the kids are playing D&D. Again, the kids are more natural playing D&D in E.T. than they are playing in Stranger Things, because they're talking across each other. There's nothing that's it's scripted. Of course, it's scripted, but they kids talk across each other. Kids got a can of pop opening there, and they've got this happening, and they're going across a pizza. It's kinetic. It moves. And to me, this is what some directors get wrong. It's the fact that the Goonies is exactly the same. The Goonies, the kids are talking 90 to the dozen. They're talking across themselves. They are not just waiting for the next line to be fed. They're just bickering, and it's just somebody filming kids being kids.
It really is. I mean, what I would say as well is, I think just quickly before I come back to this, got a question from an amazing member of our community, Sharon, who says this film captures the 80s family suburb perfectly and burb life from America. I mean, Sharon is American as well, which has a question for you, Rob, which is, how do you feel about the Poltergeist sequels? And I'll extend that into the remake as well.
Yeah, I really like the second movie, and I if John will let me, who's my publisher, I would happily do a second book, and I've got some ideas and some concepts for the second book. I like that film. I think that film's good. This film, I think, and the way it uses TV as a medium for malevolence and for evil, it's a creepy film, but it's also a film that I think has a lot of the traits in a lot of these films at the time, which is kind of the idea of kind of the hidden Indian burial ground or sacred spaces. The second film takes that even further, and I don't mind the idea of, yes, it's a bit cliche, the Native Americans helping the hapless non-educated, non-thoughtful, spiritual white people, assist them into become better people, because I think this is a film to do with progression of ways of thinking. This is a very American movie, very consumer driven, and as the films progress, they get better. They become better people in many ways. The idea of having a swimming pool, the idea of being better, and the one-upmanship, it goes, and they become kind of slightly more in tune with maybe sort of better values. This is again looking back at it, reflecting over 40 years, but I think it does. I think it sums up the 80s perfectly. I think it sums up the consumerism of the 80s. The greed is good, which we get later on in the 80s. But these are people that I like. These are people that are going to watch this film on a regular basis. Yeah. Yes, I had to watch it a lot because I did a book on it, but I also like the fact that they feed dogs under the table, and they bicker and they fight and they throw food at each other, and they are a good natural family to so when things happen to them, you think, oh, that's not particularly pleasant. Exactly the same as the second one, that the conflict between Steve and Reverend Kane outside, like, let me in your house, let me come in and disturb your family, let me take your family to pieces, I'm going to come and take your kids away. That's horrific. That's really scary.
It really is. I think as well, I mean, touching on the consumerism there, one thing I do notice in this film, and I certainly don't believe they would have been using product placement this early on, is it's very 80s from the consumerism element, because you see so many branded products everywhere in abundance that they're using.
They're using kind of, I think that even at the dinner table you can kind of see that there's
golden griddle syrup.
And there was some kind of Cocoa Pops thing, and I think the scenes before when Tweety had died, and I think they're not quite as it's gold, some G&G. That's that. And then his drink goes, but again it's there's stuff in this that they're not making thousands and thousands of dollars by having Tom Cruise doing bits and pieces, and driving certain cars, and it's things are scattered around, and even the Star Wars stuff. So I wish he collected half that stuff. I wish he kept it, because there's a Darth Vader head with collectible case. I thought, that's worth thousands now. And some Cheerios.
Now, this is an interesting thing. This is from real. I mean, this is something I believe we spoke before about the Enfield hauntings and the Enfield poltergeist, famous British case, where there are supposed instances of where there are poltergeist or is it poltergeists for plural? Poltergeist? What's the plural?
I don't know. Poltergeists. They poltergeisted. I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Okay, we'll say where there are poltergeists present, or poltergeist present. The whole thing about bent cutlery, etc. That's supposed to be a common thing. But I was going to say one of the themes I very much strongly get through this movie that you see is how many television sets the family has.
Yeah,
and I think it's the trope that the parents are using the television as a multi-purpose thing, in that it's a babysitter, it's for lullabies, etc. So the kids can't sleep, so the television's on till it goes off.
And it's Homer Simpson, isn't it? Teacher's secret lover. It's kind of TV in America go together, and TV in the UK do as well. But this is the idea. People being included. It's very 1950s. It's a nuclear family. We've got a new toy in our house. The toy happens to be TV. And again, the idea of just watching TV has become part of the staple. And again, if you watch a lot of these films of this time as well, and you watch Gremlins, it's exactly the same. That Billy will be watching TV. It'll be on in the background all the time. There's a lot of people, Joe Dante being a huge film fanatic and TV fanatic, and Toby Hooper and Steven Spielberg. They grew up with this. They grew up with the TV being it's the latchkey kids. They're coming home from school, and the TV becomes their educator. They become it's a third parent in many ways. And there's a morality tale in this, with the idea being, of course, is that if you just switch the TV on and you just let that entertain the kids, and you get them to do and know everything, and it gets they become Homer Simpson. But in many ways, it's showing the fact that the TV is bad for the eyes, but it's also the fact that it's how people live. And I know from having a family of my own, the fact that I've got a screen here talking to you guys, I've got a screen watching it, my family are in another room watching another TV, and more than likely my wife will be on her phone. We are screen addicted, and it's got worse and worse and worse as the years have gone by. But this one it's the dad goes to sleep in front of Steve goes in front of the TV. Carol Ann's just there, and just a little portable one, and it's just everywhere.
It really is. But equally, the television turns out to be it's almost this movie in some ways is a statement against. I mean, sorry, it's coming up to a really wonderful practical effect here without a cut here, and without anyone making a sound.
They just I not to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it before. This is an amazing effect.
Yeah, it's a very simple one, but just really
it is. It just works really well.
It does. It really does. But it's again going back to the TV thing. It's the point is that the TVs are the conduit with which to get access to the house to Carol Ann. Yet the parents unwittingly have an abundance of conduits to get to Carol Ann that they are putting her in front of.
Here you go, guys. Here's the best way to attach your audience. The poltergeists and the spirits are better than advertising. They are on the TV more than the adverts and more than the TV themselves. They've found the best way in it. It's the best possible way. If you could employ them to do a fantastic advertising, a PR campaign, they're brilliant. They've influenced their audience, which is Carol Ann. They've told her things she wants to hear, Carol Ann, and they said it's the fact that these are the kind of the things that you can do. And the TV is, I mean, there is other films that use TV as a conduit, and things like White Noise, which is quite a good sort of film. It's in the late 90s, early 2000s. I quite like that as a film. There's something behind static. There's something there that's watching us. There's some sort of presence that's actually going on. But I think the idea of having kind of they're going to come back to the TVs being on all the time, going back to the 1950s. This is what TV is. It's you've invited another party into your house. It's not you reading books and talking around the campfire.
Exactly, but equally with television, for the most part, you trust. And again, this is changed in society with the internet, where it's a lot harder to basically who you invite into your house. But with television, it would generally be trustworthy who you were inviting into the house. You'd know that nothing too, because you'd know there were the broadcast standards, etc.
Yeah,
and that's the thing. So the television is almost a trustworthy babysitter. Is probably the best way to describe it.
It is. It's the FCC are going to be there to help and assist. I think that's the right acronym. Is the FCC in the States?
Yeah, that's right. The Federal Communications Commission.
So we have that, and there's an expectation. We know Fox News lies. Sorry, if anybody who believes in Fox News, but it was designed to be. There's moral standards and there's ways of thinking, and this is kind of how the news is portrayed, and this is how bits and pieces. It's become. As I said, it becomes slightly more difficult now that we have to sort of filter our media and make opinions and judgments and things between ourselves and how we see how we consume media. But you'd expect then, as we had in the UK, that the BBC was honest and truthful and did everything it should have done. And it's exactly the same with the broadcaster series. But this is the thing: we are happily bringing in somebody or something that will change opinion and change facts and change our thought processes in some ways, and it becomes a different party, a different thing to allow us to do things in a different way. This isn't how my parents taught me. This is how my teachers taught me. This is what TV's taught me how to do. And maybe it's cooking and nice things, but it's also politics and being adopted through your closet and things like that as well.
Anyway, now for our chat, I'm just going to say Disney. I think Disney is actually the poltergeist now, because Carol Ann is bringing in a Snoopy. That's not a Disney property. That's why they're getting rid of her on screen. They don't want Disney property. That's why that's why the brother stays okay, because he's a company man.
He's okay. He's kept the high ground, the moral high ground with Disney, and it is amazing. You're right. If you could go back and think about the fact that this is 40 years old, and the fact that Disney would now, you're completely right, has owned everything that we've seen so far. They control the horizontal, they control the vertical, which is a kind of scary thing. That effect with the chair. Again, it's so easy to do. It's very clever how it works. And again, if you guys didn't know how it works, it's purely the way that the chair is configured. It goes down one of the pathways in the kitchen. So you can kind of see that obviously you've got the brown tiles, and there's one, and you can just see in the middle of the happy smiley face, there's one slightly thicker line between all the different tiles, and basically just took the grout out, and all it is just just somebody pulling it along and underneath. And again, it's the same with Carol Ann. You can see again, because I've seen it so often, you can just see where her butt is. You can just see the fact that there's just a line that's one slightly thicker, and it again the practical effects. If you don't notice, because of course people wouldn't be watching this in Blu-ray in high def and watching it over a watch party 40 odd years ago, people wouldn't notice that effect. It's pretty obvious there when you see it. But of course, we've seen this film so often, we know and pick out the things. That's why we have cinema sins and things nowadays, because people spend a lot of time picking things to pieces. And there's a scene later on with the stake moving, which is done in exactly the same way. It's just a table and somebody's underneath in the cupboard, just with 2 sticks doing that. But it works. And sometimes the most subtle effects and the most easiest to do effects, you don't need CGI all the time. You can trick people very quickly, very easily with very subtle things, and people won't notice them because they're watching good acting or good narratives or good stories, and people aren't picking out these bits and pieces. And I saw a program recently about Disney and how they did all the rides at Disney. And there's a fantastic one about Haunted Mansion. And I thought there's a thing to do with Pepper's Ghost, and I thought that's incredibly clever but incredibly easy. But the effect is so good for a very, very cheap, because
Pepper's Ghost originates in the late 1800s from my memory. It's a very old effect.
And it works really well, and it is literally smoke and mirrors. That's what it's designed to be, and I think that's a fantastic way. People go, how do they do that? Why do this look so realistic? It's because people have spent many years figuring out how to use mirrors and to manipulate with things without computers, and we're very reliant on computers now.
Just to interrupt for a second, and again, the beauty of high definition here, I can see on my copy, I believe in the black frame on the wall behind him, that is very, very 80s. There is a Love Is cartoon on the wall there.
Yes, there is, yes. It's just above the toilet bowl.
That's right, in the black frame.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. When they're getting I've not seen one of those for a long time.
That's right.
But even the wallpaper and stuff of its time. I mean, this is why I love 80s movies, because again, we see it later on. We've got these vast 2-story house plants. They've got all these kind of bits and pieces in the house that we don't have those anymore particularly. But I do like 80s movies, because 80s movies seem to just pinpoint an aesthetic. You watch Chopping Mall, for example. That's perfect 80s.
Wonderful. And we watched that with Kelly Maroney actually last Christmas.
It's a fantastic movie,
and
it just works. But to me, that's me going to again showing where I live in the Telford Shopping Centre in 1986, and that to me that's a perfect film for a shopping centre in 1986.
For our American audience, let me just explain. I've been to Telford a number of years ago for a while. I did some training in Telford, which is a city near the Midland, not far from the Midlands of the UK. I went to a branch of Asda, which is Walmart in the centre of Telford, and one of the local residents walked up to me and started talking to me with conspiracy theories about Jesus, UFOs, and the CIA, and then asked me to buy him some beer. That's kind of an average resident of the centre of Telford.
That's a general place that you can go to, and you get that a lot. And we're now getting to the scares. It's 37, 38 minutes into the film. A third of the movie's gone. It's the scary thing in the best possible way. We've nearly gone a third of the way, a quarter to a third of the way through, and it only now starts getting scary. We've established the characters, we've established the situation, we've established that we like them, and now it's the crazy. Now it starts getting kind of a little bit kind of. This is when we've got the whirlwind and the tornado in the garden, and this is when we go over the rainbow. This is when we go to Oz. Essentially, this is when all the weird happens.
It really is. I mean, if the ground, again, this is something that's lacking in so many modern movies. If the groundwork here hadn't been done, with the best will in the world, you might not particularly cared about what happened to the family.
Yeah, we'd be no interest to us at all. The fact that we like Carol Ann because she's a little cutie, and the fact that she wants tweeted to go off and it smells funny in his coffin, and the fact we like Robbie because Robbie's just a kid of all the things that we're very jealous of the Star Wars collection. But this is right. It's taken us 35 minutes to enjoy the fact that these people are normal people. These are people who have a life and they live their life and things happen, and it's not very often that you get eaten by a tree. And this is kind of the thing that there's this foreshadowing of the fact that the Steve's talked about the fact that the tree's there and it's old and it won't hurt us and it'll be there long before the house and long after. No, it's going to eat you, dude. You got 10 minutes left before it starts trying to chew you up. But this is because it's a storm. The storm comes out of nowhere. We've seen with some lovely effects, this idea of the storm brewing in the background. And again, coming back to no CGI, it's done with liquids and with oils, and it's done in a way that this sky and these effects are done as things like Indiana Jones is with tissue paper and oil and water tanks. And these aren't effects that You can't do it at home. These are not effects you need a degree in visual effects to do. These are things that you could make creatures and monsters and those kind of bits and pieces quite easily. And this is exactly what they do.
Yeah.
It's using the effects that they have to make some fantastic bits of work. And yes, there's some matte painting involved, and yes, that there is some composite effects done in this, but a lot of it is done with oils and with paint and with all these kind of amazing bits and pieces. And of course, later on when we see the ghosts and the creatures, yes, they're lit well, but these are just bits of plastic and bits of tissue paper that float about. And I think it's stunning that you can get these amazing effects with very little in the way of a VFX budget. Yes, it is a huge movie, but it's done cleverly. It's done well. It's done where the house moves and changes and alters, and again something we'll talk about later. When Diane goes up the wall, for example, and again it's quite a clever effect, but it's done in camera. It's not done in post. It's all done there and then. It's all done with rotation and movement and things like that. And yes, there was a set built for the house, and the inside of the house is far bigger than the outside of the house. But there's lots of things in this that just work really well, and it's light, and the use of light and the use of sound, and the use of distortion of cameras and lenses. But it's all done in camera. It's not a great deal of it is done in post.
Yeah. One thing I do like about this home is we went through it now, even if we can see some of the damages from the Poltergeist. Spoilers. There is an element, the house looks lived in.
Yeah.
It does on the floor. Like pristine. We can see there actually, what's quite a nice little thing there is he's a home salesman from selling these houses as they're being built. You can see that's his carpet and sort of wallpaper sample books for finishing the homes was stacked against the wall, which is quite a nice little.
Just things that are just having toothbrushes out and all the stuff under the bed. So when Caroline a couple of minutes ago just falls down, it's not just the bed falls. Here's all the junk that she's pushed underneath the bed. Here's all the glitter and the My Little Ponies that are underneath there. These are kids that are kids. These are kids that are going, we tidied your room. Yes, push, and everything's just gone straight underneath their underneath their bed. And then we get to the idea of, as we say later on, the swimming pool, and I wouldn't want to swim in that either. It's not a pleasant thing, and we know what's underneath nice there. No,
yeah, exactly. What's interesting is I'm noticing the son appears to actually have, aside from mud and water, he seems to have blood on him, but I don't know if it's his own. Is it maybe from the tree?
Yeah, it seems to be. I always wondered this, whether he's got kind of sinew and kind of bits and pieces, but it looks like he's cut his nose or something as well, because it comes straight down from his nose across to his cheeks. And I wonder whether and again, it's whether it's not something we see that often with children being injured in film. Again, this doesn't happen that often in movies nowadays, and we certainly don't see kids with blood on their faces or injured particularly more. So yes, it's mixed in with mud. It's mixed in with kind of goo and nasty bits and pieces, but it does look like there's a lot of red and stuff in it as well. But he gets poor Rob. He gets a lot of stuff in this movie, and in the next one as well. Yeah,
sequel is probably even worse.
Yeah, it's like, here you go, you have a chainsaw thrown at you, and then have your braces wrapping around itself, trying to get yourself into an electrical socket. He's not the. In all honesty, I think the Dana just goes. I'm not having any of this. See you later. We know why Dominique Dunne in the second and third film. If anybody doesn't know that, we'll talk about that in a bit, about the curse of the film. But the poor guy, he doesn't get abducted and things, but he gets a lot of he becomes the whipping boy of this movie, unfortunately.
Now this scene here feels a very Spielberg kind of close encounter scene. I mean, there is, as of course you know, there's a lot of controversy about which scenes were directed by Spielberg, which ones were done by Tobe Hooper. Example, this feels very Spielberg to me.
It does. It looks like the dad's been through the ringer. The way it's shot is a very, very slow-paced tracking shot across his shoulder and things as well. But it looks like a Spielberg shot. I mean, there's a lot of, well, essentially what we're doing at the moment is there's no wide shots. There's a lot of kind of close-up use of kind of eyes and faces and acting within the face. But you're right, it's a very subtle shot. But if you watch Jaws, if you watch Close Encounters, it's very, very similar the way it's produced and put together in the same way. I do think in this scene, I know that it's not in the same place, but you can see there's a Dr. Veckman and a Dr. Stantz and a Dr. Zedmore
Yeah.
potentially in the next room down the corridor, or there may well have been at some point some discussions between this team and some other university lecturers and professors in New York, shall we say. And it kind of makes me smile that this kind of comes out 2 years before Ghostbusters. But the idea of having a parapsychology department in every university, I wish I had one. We haven't got one.
Sparky John, one of our producers, just raised, and we'll speak about the elephant in the room because it leads nicely into that. There's a little connection to V here, which is Richard Lawson, who's playing one of the scientists here, who played Ryan. He was also playing Ben in V, the original miniseries. Unfortunately, this movie does have a very sad connection to V as well in the role. Well, go on, you go for it, Rob. It's very sad.
No, I honestly don't know that much about it, in all honesty. I did know there was a connection, but if you want to elaborate, there's something
Dana, who was played by, forgive me if I can't pronounce the name correctly, Dominic Dunn, was due to play Robin Maxwell in V. About the same time as she died. She was due to be one of the main characters in V who had a pivotal role in it. And unfortunately, her role was recast after her sad murder. So there was kind of a double V connection in this. But I didn't know that. This is a wonderful scene.
Yeah, it's a great. It's again, it's clever, and it's got fun, and yes, it's scary.
Again, I wonder if this is potentially a Spielberg kind of consultancy. Do you know what it reminds me of? I know it sounds very strange. Have you ever seen Spielberg's Amazing Stories, the opening?
I have. That's fantastic. I love that film, that series, and I love the fact that there's things in it that reminds me of me. There's a very interesting one where the guy collects things from his childhood and builds this huge vast collection.
With Mark Hamill.
That's a great one, and I love that, this idea, because I've been collecting for all these things my entire life. They're worthless. And he goes, no, they're not. But I like that because I'm sure a lot of people who are listening, watching at the moment, have comic book collections and DVD collections and record collections, and that resonated with me as a teenager. And I just remember, this is me with X amount of thousand comics in my garage, watching that and going, they're going to be worth something at some point to me. And I thought that is a great episode. And Amazing Stories is great. It's a shame that it's not put on more. It's one of these shows
it really is. But that shot there, especially with all the stuff flying around with its own purpose going on at the same time, very much reminds me of kind of the opening to the show.
Yeah, but everything's kind of mixing and twisting around, and kind of this kind of a maelstrom of kind of interesting and weird and wonderful ways of doing things. It's a great series, and it really should be. It should be sort of seen more because it is a really clever show, and a lot of kind of those shows don't get the recognition they deserve. And Monsters is again another one that I really enjoyed. Again, I watching things that getting stuff from the States from Sky, or getting stuff that again it's where we live. We had filtered things through, and getting satellite TV and cable TV in the 90s, and getting a lot of these shows and things like The Outer Limits and the remake of The Outer Limits and things like this. We got in the UK that you guys in the States had a lot more access to than we did. But being opened up to how good American TV was. Amazing Stories, I think, because it was quite a big one. I think it probably was on Sky in the UK. Probably one of the biggest things that they had. But I remember watching it, really, really enjoying it. And same as the young Indiana Jones as well at the same time. Was quite good. And again, you mentioned V. Again, apologies, I didn't realise that Dominic Dunn was going to be in V. But her family are actors, and of course, there's a connection between this film and American Werewolf in London as well. If anybody knows that one, I'll throw that out to the audience. If anybody knows what the connection between Dominic Dunn and American Werewolf in London is involved with. But again, the seeing V just after this, in the 80s, that was so 80s. It is perfect 80s science fiction TV. And there's certain scenes, and that would still stick with me. One where they do the face, and also the eating of the mice, and that's still something that going back, and you can see the effects on YouTube. That's amazing, and it's very clever. And of course, we would do it in CG nowadays, but that's still an amazing effect. That's still an effect that still goes, wow! Seeing that as a kid, it is nightmare-inducing. It's creepy. And Visa's a show that didn't really get as much recognition as it should have done. It was a very, very clever show.
It really was.
And it really wasn't. And these ideas of big miniseries like that, which had a lot of budget, very risky. I don't think many people would try that nowadays on a mainstream network TV, because it was at the time. It was very. People say that sci-fi doesn't sell. I think it does in many ways, but I think it's a lot of people took risks with shows like that, and they could have been huge bombs. But they were very, very well put together, very well produced, and very kind of high budgets, and people watched them as well.
Now, this seems quite interesting. This does lead on potentially again to something that's spoken about in the sequel. As we see, the mother here seems to have a very empathic connection with her daughter. Obviously, being a mother, she would have a connection with her. But we do wonder if there's some kind of evidence of the psychic powers that become evident between the two in the sequel. Especially as the half sister or the stepsister is just seemed to be very upset by the whole thing. She's not kind of being strong and bonding, and it again, you know, with the fate of how things happened, where she does disappear from effectively this movie, and she definitely isn't in the sequel for the very sad reasons we spoke about. You do get a feeling that she is an outsider to the family unit.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to have much. She's not hugged. She's not cuddled. She's not kind of with them. She's always away. She comes when the house, again, spoilers, when the house implodes, and she comes back for the final scene. She goes, "What's happening? Where have you been? Your mum's been stuck in a swimming pool full of rotting corpses, and your sister's been abducted." She goes, "I'm off. See you later." And you're right. She just seems to just taken it away completely from this film. Again, coming back to, I'm sure people who are watching and listening know a little bit about the curse of Poltergeist and about Dominique Dunn's untimely death. And she was killed by her boyfriend just as the film was being released, and just as the film was getting its premiere. People were saying there's a curse of the film. In my opinion, no. It makes great media, and it makes great stories to have around the film. But the things that happen in the film, and the things that happen, the time between this happening and all the other events that happen aren't close. They're not things that happen within an 18-month film production. Yes, she is murdered at the end of this film. Carol Ann sadly passes away, but it's not for another 8 or 9 years. Again, I think people mentioned that the fact that Reverend Kane, the second film, was very, very scary because Julian Becker played it, had cancer at the time, and people pick up all these things, and it builds up. Again, going back to the fact that we are very spoiled with movies now. We can just go on the internet and find anything very, very quickly. Going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the 90s, we didn't have that access to information. We had Fangoria, and we had Starburst, and we had bits and pieces that kind of came through. And probably slightly more in the States than we had in the UK, but we had to build jigsaw pieces of a film together, and people extrapolated the things from a very limited production details and production backgrounds or stories written about the movies. And of course, there's the debate between whether Spielberg or Tobe Hooper directed this movie, and of course people still debate that, and that's a very interesting concept because we still don't know.
It really is, but I would say there's actually potentially another Poltergeist curse death that happened many years later, which is quite a tragic one. And it's sort of a minor actor in the movie, and it would be Lou Perryman, who played Bluto, or the coffee theft guy, the guy we see stealing.
Yes,
coffee.
the guy who goes to the coffee.
Exactly.
Bluto.
Yeah. Tragically, he was axe murdered at home in 2009 by an escaped. Well, allegedly by it's pretty much the trope of an escaped mental patient killed him with an axe.
That itself becomes quite an odd thing. That's how you expect most 70s films to be, and it's kind of odd that actually happened in relatively modern times. And we can see, just as we're watching it now, somebody gets bitten. And again, that's if you read the novel, you see what bites him, and you see the fact that we see the door guardian a bit later on, and it's a kind of variation of this. It's a big beast. It's a creature. There's things there that aren't just ghosts. There is malevolence there. And we understand, of course, as we go through the movie that yes, that there's a spirit trapped underneath the house. Again, you watch a second movie that they're all buried alive by Reverend Cain, but influenced by the beast. But there's things here that aren't just stealing watches. And you mentioned Enfield Poltergeist. There was the notion of having a spirit of an old gentleman who was angry and bitter, but he was still deemed to be a person. But there's things in this movie which aren't human. There is ghosts and spirits and monsters, and this is something that when I was writing and doing some research, no one had defined what a poltergeist was. You know what a werewolf was. It is the tropes of a werewolf. We know what a vampire is or was, and we know what a ghost is by watching other ghosts. No one knew what a poltergeist was. So the definitions of this film, the idea that what can it and can't it do, even with Nightmare on Elm Street, we know for well that Freddy can't get out into the real world. He does in the second film, obviously, but there's limitations what he can and can't do. Hellraiser, exactly the same. You open the box, we came. That's you have to open the box in the first way to get them to be there. There's limitations and there's tricks, and of course we know that if you watched Cabin in the Woods, they always have to have set things to do things, set triggers. We don't know what a poltergeist is. We know because we've heard about the Enfield Poltergeist, and we read 14 times in the 70s and 80s, and we watched Arthur C. Clarke, and we kind of knew all the books and things we got as kids. So poltergeist may or may not be, but we don't know what it can do. So the idea of kind of it can do this, it can do that, it changes a lot in this film. It doesn't has a definition. It's yes, they steal things possibly, but do they bite people? Is it again, we've watched The Conjuring and things. Is it to do with a house? Is it to do with a person? Is it to do with something else? And they elaborate a lot of stuff that isn't, in the best way, horror lore. I suppose that might be the best way of explaining things.
It's quite good in that way. So just for interrupting, Sharon, again, Amazing Community Member, just said, well, that's where all the blood came from. If you look, the son has skinned his nose quite badly.
Yeah. So I think just catching yourself like that. If you've ever had a head cut as a kid, you come back looking like Mick Foley, and your parents, "What have you done?" I've tripped over. Every kid's done it, and I remember having knees and legs that were just ripped to people. People, no, it's the fact that you go out and play football with your mates, and again, come back to a UK audience that playgrounds aren't designed as they were nowadays. It was usually concrete, with possibly Corona bottles smashed across them, and they were not the best and most conducive place to grow up, and you'd rip your knees to pieces, your legs would go to pieces. Now it's all soft and squishy, and it's much easier to not fall on your head. But we kind of, you can see his nose has got a big scratch in it. It wasn't there in a couple of scenes before, but he has got a great big scar down his nose in that one. So but yeah, the poor guy that has this. But I think the entire family in this, again, you feel for them. They are injured and they are hurt both physically and emotionally. And you do watch this and go, he's not been to sleep for X amount of days. He's not been to work. But
again, we're seeing the inner. I think I could draw a line between the family, as I said earlier. We've got the inner core of the family being Carol Ann, the son, the mother, the father, and then the stepdaughter on the periphery.
Yeah, she's not there. You can't see it. She's not involved with these discussions and these debates. She's not part of the fact that they are talking about spiritualism and the idea of kind of where you go to when you die. Yes, it's designed to help Robbie a little bit, but she should have two kids. There should be one each side. There should be her, and maybe she's 16 and doesn't want that. Maybe she's going to do their own thing. We're not going to walk around a house by yourself with a poltergeist. You've been in there. You know what's happening. She's not in these scenes at all. She's cut out of this film quite a lot.
Not when you open up the bedroom door next door to her. I mean, I'd imagine she's not sleeping in her bedroom. So you open up the door, it's literally the bedroom door next to her bedroom. You open it, and half the world's flying around in the bedroom. I'd be like, I'm not sleeping here tonight. You
know what? I think it's an entire sketch, isn't there? I think I don't know which comedian was it. If I was in that house, I'd be out the door straight away. And I think that's kind of how you would be. If you can't call the Ghostbusters, what do you do? Father Karras isn't around, as we know. What are we going to do? This is very difficult to sort out. But who do you deal with? You get the local university and you talk to the parapsychology department. Trust me, we haven't got one at my local university. But we go even further. This is when Tangina comes in a little bit. There's powers and people. I'd love to see a Tangina show.
Well, one
Just
thing
about her.
one thing I would say as well is that I've taken back from this film is Carol Ann must be of an age where she's not in full-time education, because you've got what happens in the film, and then if you take your real world thing, if your 5 or 6 year old child who's supposed to be in full-time education doesn't attend for weeks as it's supposed, days or weeks as it's supposed to have been seen here, then the local authorities will get involved, and then they're going to say, you're going to say to them, where is your 5-year-old? She was kidnapped by the poltergeist, and now she's in the now she's in a dimension by the TV.
Kids again. I don't know whether it's the same as the guys in the States. If your kid's off school and you write, and if you happen to be the kid's off school and you come back with a suntan, you know for a while that they've not been ill and you've taken a few days off at the end of term. But you're right. It could be that they're over summer holidays, but I don't think it is, because of course they're getting ready for school a few days before this. They're shouting, "Ask Dad, ask Dad!" And when Robbie's glass shatters, they're going to school. They're on the way. Dana's got her bike and her school clothes on. The kids are going to school. You're right. There's a lot of these. But I know we were nitpicking the movie particularly, but you're right. There's certain bits and pieces in this. They go, well, you would know nowadays, because of course everything's tracked and traced and emailed, and we live in a much more kind of conformed and unified society, unfortunately. But this is obviously the beginnings of that, is the fact that you would know which kids are going to school, which kids aren't going to school. Eventually, when Steve goes back to work a little bit, and he talks to his, he's not been at work. He's going, what's happening? What have you been doing? There's a couple of nods here and there to things, but it's still a family in crisis and trauma. But there's no explanation about what happens to them and things in many ways, and when they go to school. And these scenes now with the stairs and the visual effects in these are so well put together. And this is coming up to the scene I mentioned right at the beginning that there's certain scenes in this movie that I still dislike. There's still things that scare me, and this is from this onward for the next couple of minutes. And you know what's coming up. You haven't seen it before. This is probably Toby Hooper at his most Toby Hooper-esque. And there's things in this that we see and we go, yeah, that's pretty gross, considering the classification of this movie, and what this movie got as the classification, which was pushed by Spielberg a lot. I think he wasn't.
I'm going to say two things here. One, what kind of inhuman monster takes a piece of raw steak out, places it directly on the worktop, not on a chopping board or a plate? Right, yeah. And secondly, he has just taken his unwashed hands with raw beef, taken that chicken leg out of his mouth and put it back in. Yeah.
He's if he's not going to get what's coming to him in a minute, he's going to get it tomorrow. Especially, you're not coming to work for the next week, mate. You're going to have food poisoning. Yeah. And that's an expensive looking steak. That's not
it was someone's house. I mean, obviously, this is disgusting. But going to when someone says help yourself to what you want from the fridge, it usually means
a pack of crisps. Yeah, you're not going to go. I'll tell you what, we're going to start rooting through their finest whiskey that they've got and looking at a piece of Kobe beef steak that's obviously moving by itself a little bit. It's probably out of date, as you can see in a second. But again, my goodness, help yourself to steak. It's right. You're right. It's just like he's gonna get it in a minute anyway. But again, we mentioned Robbie being a guy who gets a whipping boy for this. His character also becomes, he's not going to come back. He's not going to go, he's got food poisoning, or the fact he's going to do something particularly gross in a minute. But he gets he gets bitten. He gets this scene, and this is again, how do you quantify this being a kids movie with this scene? And this is a gross scene. Even now, I feel that this is the bit that gave me nightmares and still is not particularly pleasant to watch. And it's yes, you can see it's rubber and you can see it's Steven Spielberg's hands because they were. But this is not a nice scene, and it's Spielberg at his most nasty and his most 80s. But a lot of Spielberg films are. There's skeletons, there's creatures, and there's monsters, and if you watch Temple of Doom, it's exactly the same. There's this scene in Last Crusade, exactly the same. Yeah. These are things that melting Nazis. You'd not get away with that nowadays.
With Temple of Doom, we were fortunate enough actually to speak to Julian Glover for one of our watch parties. We interviewed him about all his career, Empire Strikes Back, and of course Temple of Doom. Last Crusade. Sorry, and he spoke to us about the making of the death mask, kind of the melting sort of similar scenes within that. And that was absolutely fascinating.
Because
Practical effects.
In those films, there's going to be something nasty happen at the end, and we won't talk about the fourth one because it's just a bit of a CG mess.
They didn't make a fourth Indiana Jones film.
There's three of them, and the TV.
He rode off into the sunset at the end of the third, and who knows what further wacky adventures he got into.
Poochie went off to his own people, his own planet.
Right.
It's exactly because that to me it is. There's three good films and a fantastic TV series. Again, coming back to Amazing Stories, that and having that and Young Indiana Jones on at the same time. I'm sure on Sky in the late 80s and early 90s. These are great shows, really high budget, well put together, well executed. And I did watch Young Indiana Jones wanting them to do melting Nazis, but it wasn't. It was more of a historical context. It's still a fantastic looking show. Again, this scene coming down the stairs in a minute, and it's just so good. Again, the visual effects, just the practical effects of the light and the stairs and the situation, and just this direction of it. It's staged. It's just put together so well and so cleverly. And there we go. If you read the book and you read some behind the scenes material, there is slightly more malevolence to this scene than we see. That we see here, because here's again like Indiana Jones, it's beautiful. You see these fantastic floating figures. Again, it's use of optics and optical effects, but it's also use of water tank effects, and doing things in a way that we hadn't seen before. And I think again, these aren't cheap effects, but these are not VFX effects. These are effects that are done practically, but they are done with somebody with imagination, with thought, with ideas. And what do? We create this ethereal thing, and what looks like it's going to come down the stairs, and it's water, it's oils, it's all mixing materials together, and it looks fantastic, and it's just a great looking effect, and the ghosts look stunning.
What would you give right now to see a proton beam just wrap around that?
I was just thinking, just get them. There you go. Yeah, there you go. And again, just lighting a cigarette. You can just see Dan Aykroyd. Like, I'm not going to get cigarettes on cameras anymore. But just it's. But you wonder whether that's the same ghost from Ghostbusters that helped Dan Aykroyd out in that other one scene. Shall we say?
It could be. But I'd say I would actually say that the influence of some of the ghost design in this film would certainly have had the ghost design in this film would certainly had influence on what we saw in the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it is.
The style and the ethereal nature of them.
It is. I love Ghostbusters as a film. It's again a friend of mine called Anthony Bueno did a fantastic documentary.
Yeah, we've had Anthony on for a watch party while we were for his documentary.
Yeah, he's great, and that film was brilliant. And both him and his sister Claire are good friends of mine, and they are such passionate and advocates. I thought I love Ghostbusters. I've loved it. It's good. And I went, and it was like I've never seen this film. My goodness me, you know so much about it. But he's a lovely guy, and it's his passion. It's been a passion project for him watching that film, and it's such a good movie to watch. And you're right, the effects, the optical effects within this are the same. Watching the scene back and what they're watching in the video, and you can see more ghosts within this space. In the book, and again behind the scenes a little bit, you see. I don't know whether it was done as a retroactive thing. You see Cain, and you see Reverend Cain guiding the people, and you see him guiding the other miners or the people who are trapped underneath the house, and you see the fact that he looks at the camera. He knows they're being watched, and he knows people are looking at them. And there's a slight kind of when we see the beast later on in the film, and people say it's the door guardian. Hey, Robbie's off. There you go, off you pop.
Yeah,
you're going off in a taxi.
Well, where is he being sent to right now? Is it to her mother's? Is it?
Yeah, I think so. He's just going somewhere. Off you go. And it's like they have a bundle of cash.
I mean, from the way I would imagine it, if we're trying to tie in the continuity. Sometimes I like to try and patch up continuity in the movies when we do these. So I'd maybe imagine that they're sending him to her mother's, and the dog is going, because the dog, as we know, has almost a connection with the spirit, so he's acting as a guardian of Robbie. So maybe that's why we sent. And the reason that he's going unaccompanied, say the grandmother didn't come over first, is a matter of urgency to get him out of the house, because there is how dangerous it is now. Let's just get a taxi and get him out of here.
He's out of the way. Have a bundle of cash and send him off in a taxi. We don't know where. It's a very odd scene. Wouldn't send my kid My daughter's about the same age as him. Is like, I would yeah, go off we pop to somewhere, go to Nanny's house in a taxi. No way would I do that at the moment. But it's kind of just, but it just kind of, but again, it's the 80s. He said we were skinning our knees and grazing our faces in parks that were more than likely very, very dangerous and should be condemned. But we did, and people did do this. And again, we're seeing this from somebody who's watching this film 40 years on. Maybe that was the thing that people did, that went, yeah, it's fine, he'll be okay. Nothing could possibly go wrong in a yellow cab. It's no problems there at all. But there's elements in this movie. Again, we haven't seen Dana for a long time either. I mean, she's not been in any of the scenes. She's away. She's disappeared from this film again for a long time. But yeah, the idea of Cain being kind of the lead, and the beast being kind of the lead malevolent creature behind this, and we get the door guardian, and we get the kind of the fantastic thing at the top of the stairs, and we get the thing coming out, again, spoilers, there's a thing that comes out of the closet. I say spoilers, it's 40 years, you should have seen it by now, come on. Most people would have seen Poltergeist, or at least know about Poltergeist, or at least watch Family Guy or The Simpsons about Poltergeist, and probably know a little bit about it. But there's a scene where the head comes out, but there is conceptual artwork, and there's some ideas and some models that had a slightly more human face, and we don't get that in this movie, but there is this notion, this idea that there's kind of a human malevolence behind it, whether sort of a supernatural kind of creature, and there is artwork out there with this kind of face. It looks very much like London from Midnight, very much of the Lon Chaney kind of ghastly face and big teeth and kind of big Victor's grin, a little bit like the Joker, I guess. But I think the idea of having this kind of non-human creature works. I think this idea of having this kind of poltergeist thing, of course, they retroactively go back in the second movie and change bits and pieces. But I like the fact that we don't see what these things are. Yes, we get the ghosts, and we have again the spoilers. We're going to have skeletons a bit later on, but we don't know what these things are. And this little scene here again, just opening the door and just seeing if she's okay, and just again, it's just a little minute and a half scene, probably not even that. It doesn't need to happen. It doesn't need to be here. It just humanizes the characters a little bit more as well. So but having these little moments of characterization, these little moments of people being human, you don't get that in a lot of films now. Things go from action scene to action scene, set piece to set piece. She's got a big pile of washing in her hand. She doesn't need to have that. She's in a dressing gown and slippers. Yeah, it's not a scene where it's glamorized.
I personally just wouldn't be going upstairs.
No, it's just, I'm going to stop away.
Yeah.
But even just that, there's no effect. We don't see anything. It's a post-production kind of audio effect. It don't even need to be there. It just works as a little thing. And again,
here we are. We're seeing the extent of basically. We will learn what the problem is, and we're seeing the potential extent of the problem now, should they go forward.
But look out for the fence. Lovely white picket fence. This idea of Americana, this idea of kind of lovely, here's your ideal 1950s dream, your American dream that's promised you, all in front of a white picket fence. Give it a minute or two and it completely changes, and it's not a white picket fence at all, and you begin to see this fence stops, it starts becoming decaying, it starts becoming very dark, and of course when they turn around and see what's behind them, of course. But the other thing, of course, is that's a huge cemetery. I mean, as far as cemetery is concerned, that's Midian size, that's vast. That's where's all these bodies come from? What's happened there is a thing.
No, it's always an ancient Indian burial ground.
It is. There's got to be something underneath there somewhere. Lou Diamond Phillips was involved somewhere. Again, if you're watching.
Well, let's be honest. I think year 2020 was built on an ancient Indian burial ground.
I think it was. I think somebody said no. This has been a bad year. It's not been great. Yeah, I think that's right. I think we some of these people have some spirit somewhere. But I would
say, how do you not notice that big cemetery up there when you're?
Yeah. How long have you been in this house? Oh, well, we're the first generation, because he mentions the fact that they were the first phase. And you can see there's a massive, again, it just goes from white picket fences, which just pull back slightly. There's Becky, poor Becky. But look at that. If you've not noticed that before, there's a massive cemetery there. So the white picket fences, and it becomes this kind of dark and foreboding lovely matte painting. But I think this idea of kind of people would notice that's there. There's a big cemetery there. And why is half of it on the hill? And why is it half it down What's going on?
Well, to be honest, it depends. If in the building, because we know that they allegedly cleared the land they cleared some of the land, but they didn't clear it properly. Did they? Basically, was all the land that height at some point?
Yeah, did they just kind of go down and just cut everything off? And again,
yeah, because it was easy because maybe the soil was better further down for building the homes on or something.
Yeah, it could be. I think, but again, if we go back to the second movie, we can see the fact that they are underground and they go and they do a bit of an archaeological dig under the house, which again, it could be any house. I mean, it was the intent of the film to say it's set in modern times. It's set within a modern housing and say this is where you live.
It could also be one of these things. It's a perfect community, and what they've done is because the area might have been exposed by excavating so far down, the homes would be protected by a surrounding element of sort of hills, so it might protect it from some of the wind, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely looking place. I mean, again, it's coming back to what I said, the ideal American dream of a house and American dream of a space to be in, and somewhere you'd wanted to be as a kid. You wanted to be on that estate. You wanted to be driving around on your BMX with your friends through the hills and kind of meeting the Goonies and the cast for ET and Stranger Things.
This is again something from 80s films that blows my mind. We're seeing the guy there, and he's got a battery belt for that enormous camera that's recording in very low quality. And I've got a phone on my desk here that records a magnitude of hours longer at 4K resolution.
It's shocking how quickly we've gone through those. I've got a friend called John Henschel who was a BBC cameraman from when the BBC first started, and his big wow was the fact that they had pedestal cameras in the kind of the 50s and 60s, and they said that cameras, we can now move a camera and we can move it to something. So when you see the camera guys in the 80s with these things, they're huge, and the arm ache, if you've ever done filmmaking, it's not easy. You've got a boom mic and even a small camera, and you may well have a rig on or something, but they're huge, and they give you arm ache within about the first 5 or 10 minutes. But the idea of having kind of a mobile camera, and that's huge. And you're right, the battery pack's fast. You probably have about 5 or 6 minutes worth of footage in that completely. And these are the idea of, John saying we moved from pedestal cameras to cameras that we could go and move around the studio with was this massive innovation. But yeah, you're right, our phones have, something the size of this has more technology in it than got us to the moon and got us to whatever. It's shocking how quickly we discard very high technology because it becomes commonplace to us and things as well. When we see all the tech kit in a bit, you've got all these kind of stereos and high tech technology, but this is the thing, it's status symbol, and this is the idea for how much technology could you get in your house.
Well, that's very much the thing. I mean, as we said at the start of this, a key thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is they have what would be enormous TVs for the year, at least 2 enormous TVs, if not other TVs dot around. That's because in the 80s, even a small portable color TV was very expensive.
Yeah,
it would be maybe over a month's wages for a 14-inch portable TV.
They have one in the kitchen, and again, going back to me being a kid, I had a portable TV, but it's black and white. Probably until the mid 80s, they had a quite a nice looking thing just on the counter dropped there. It looks like a old-fashioned TV monitor, but that would have cost thousands of dollars. That was a really expensive piece of kit. And I think the TV, having the TVs on, and I think there's a TV in the lounge, there's a TV in the room. There is a lot of technology around. It's very subtle. But it's again,
this touches with the whole home. This touches on something you said about the consumerism of this movie. We see so many branded products. They've got a bar. They've got a wall of cocktail glasses for entertaining. It's all about the keeping up appearances. I have a bigger car. I have a bigger TV. I have a pool in my garden.
Yeah,
But the end of the movie reveals that none of that really matters, and the family is the core value.
It is. You strip away the aesthetics of again, the connotation of keeping up with the Joneses. They are Steve's done very well for himself. He's the first. He's made more money. He's bettering himself, and completely right. It's this big drive for America, for the consumerism of America, especially at this time, and gets even more so as the 80s go through. But it is, once you strip that away, once this idea of kind of you take away this stuff, and they are bankrupt in the second movie. Again, they've got no money. The insurance won't pay out for them. There's only the house has been sucked into oblivion. We've basically stripped away all the things that you found dear, all the things that you paid for and you had credit cards for and you spent 20 years of your life working towards, and we just took away all your goods and all your earthly belongings, and they become, in the best possible way, they become better people for understanding the very kind of empty and vacuous need for consumerism. And they start the second film with they're living with her parents. They've got no money. He hasn't got I think he's a vacuum salesman in the second film, and they all this money, all this kudos, and they're not multi-millionaires by any stretch of imagination. They're just done well for themselves. They're a wealthy.
They are the American dream.
That's it. They are a family that have done and worked hard, but this is the end result. You get to buy a lot of TV, a lot of media, and a room full of Star Wars toys, and have 3 kids, and are allowed to have a two-story potted plant in your house, which is quite peculiar.
Exactly. I mean, Sparky John just says, and they have a staircase in the middle of their front room. Who has that? Well, I would say their house looks relatively open plan downstairs for a big chunk of it, and it's a very 80s thing, though, to be honest, in some big houses.
Honestly, my house has something similar. I live on an 80s estate, and my house is oddly a much smaller version than the house. I only noticed it because my mate told me, and I went, "Oh, you're right."
Did you, when you were buying the house, did you ask the letting agency? Was it the estate agent? Was it built on an Indian burial ground?
I think it was built on an ex-cricket ground, I think, but maybe the spirits of cricket players and angry wickets out. But I didn't notice until a friend of mine said, your house looks like the front of them. Well, I've been in my house 4 years, and it was about 6 months afterwards. By the way, your house looks like a small. And of course, that was like, thank you so much. Now I'm going to slightly worry that, but we have a square house, and it has a slanted roof at the front of it where our garage is. And even though our staircase isn't quite as jaunty as that, we have a staircase. I mean, it's an 80s house. We have a staircase in the lounge. It goes around on itself, and it has that. And I just thought, my goodness, I did intentionally buy that. But again, having friends who are other geeks. And once you point something out, you're never going to notice again. Of course, you're going to notice. I'm going to notice every single day I'm here. But yeah, it's never point something out to somebody who's a big geek and notices bits and pieces and things. But yeah, it's in a very, very 80s house. More than likely, I think our house is 86, 87. Which is slightly after this, but it's just an 80s estate in the middle of the UK. But these estates were vast. These estates, when they were built in the late 70s and early 80s, they were built on prime real estate land in California. They're worth an absolute fortune now, I think. But I mean, they're lovely spaces to be in. They're very. I've had the look many years ago to go to California and drive down through very similar areas. Again, I didn't go onto this estate, but these are not an estate where you can walk across and the local shops around the corner. These are 6 or 7 mile estates before you get onto a freeway, and it's replicated and replicated and replicated. And again, if anybody's listening from the US, California is huge. I mean, it's as big as the UK, and we get grumpy if we have to go more than half an hour, 40 minutes somewhere. We go up the road and the accent changes 4 times. You guys get through the entirety of California and you go and see a gig 5 hours away, and it's perfectly fine. And we go, it's there? That's really fine. It's 25 minutes drive down the road. So that our sense of scale, our sense of space in the UK is much more condensed compared to California, which is just vast. It's long and thin. And these estates, where I live, my 80s estate is probably 20 roads. This is probably 2,000 roads, all built, all very similar, and row after row after row. Which I think, if you watch the trailers for this movie, you see that it just says basically these are houses. It could be your house, it could be where you live, and it could be your neighbours. And it is designed to be the replication of the American dream from the 1950s. These are the white picket fenced houses that you were promised post-war in the States, and you get them in the late 70s and early 80s, probably later than you should have got them. But this was the American dream. This is the kind of the middle class American dream that people aspired towards.
I've got a question actually for some of our Discord community. I can see that Carla said my college Carla, one of our producers, my
Hello.
college dormitory was built on or near an Indian burial ground. She lives in America. Did I have an Indian encounter with a ghost in my dorm? Yes, that was an interesting night. Please tell us, Carla, and anyone else with any ghost stories, please type them into the Discord and we'll read the best of them out. I can't wait to see some of the
please anything like that.
I suppose fortunately I've never, well, I don't know. I don't think I've ever had a proper ghost story as such, except many years ago, I lived in a brand new house and my parents were moving to their house at the time in France. So they were kind of staying at my house, which was being used as somewhat of a warehouse for their belongings to go to their new house in France. Well, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, had a key for the house, and my mother went through a strange spate of buying furniture from house clearances on eBay for their house in France. And she bought this very old-fashioned Welsh dresser, which is like a big kind of china cabinet, would probably be the best thing for our American friends to not like an ornate china cabinet. And bearing in mind, this house was only built in 2006, and this was in 2007, so the house had no real history. My wife swears, well, my wife now, my girlfriend at the time, swears blind she could see an old woman in the living room of the house once when walking up the steps, which is quite strange because no one else was in the house at the time. But what was even more peculiar was my cat, because they say animals have a connection to the spiritual world and can understand things, can see things. He was obsessed with this Welsh dresser, and he would stare at it for hours on end. Literally, as soon as you let him in the room, he would just be fixated on it. And my mother ended up selling it on because she found it too bizarre. It was quite a peculiar thing.
I find the notion of ghosts and spirits and the idea of things and material, and I think the idea of imprinting, the idea of having something that's resonant with things, and people say people have frequencies, people have and she says it in Poltergeist, you jamming my frequencies. Of course we have vibrational frequencies in our bodies. We have, by our very nature, we have a vibrational frequency, but the idea of kind of passing this on to an inanimate object, I find that quite a fascinating story, both as a physical thing and as a space and a place, whether it be through trauma or through something else. And I find that the UK is full of amazing kind of spaces and places to do. And a friend of mine, where I live, and there's a pub called the King's Head, and my friend is a big rugby player. He's a big guy. He's a big 6'4" guy, and he grew up in a pub, and his parents owned a pub in a place called Lichfield, where I live, and it's an old-fashioned pub. It's a very old. Lichfield was an old coaching town. It's been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and this pub's been there. Pub's been there for a long time, and my friend grew up with that pub, and he said, "No, of course I know it was haunted." We talk about things. You have a chat to somebody. He goes, "Yeah, of course I know it's haunted. I saw things at the bar. I saw drinkers who weren't there. If you had a few yourself, you had a few spirits." No, you'd see old lads that have gone from 10, 20 years ago at the bar, because of course this coaching house had been there a long time. It was a centrally located pub, and people spent their entire lives in here, so they imprinted themselves into this space and this place. And I thought that was quite amazing, the fact that you have an affinity with the space that you don't leave. It's your favorite place to be. And he said, I saw things in this old pub, and I saw things on the stairwell, and I saw people when they weren't there. And my friend is a big guy, and his dad was a big guy. It's a family of rugby players and ex-farmers. And he said there was something in the basement. He said the basement where they put all the beer and where they put all the casks and all the ales in there. And he said there was something in the basement. And he said, I'd hate to go to the basement myself. My dad hated it even more. So he said, much as the stuff that I had this old house and didn't mind things happening and seeing people at the bar downstairs, but he point blankly refused as a kid to go into the basement. And even his dad, who was this big guy, said there was things in the basement that put the heebie-jeebies up, that put the willies up, and he said there was something there that would watch over your shoulder. And he just said I just didn't like it at all. So I think there is more to things, and again watching Poltergeist and the fact that Diane becomes very spiritual in this film when she goes to the other side. There is stuff, and you mentioned the Enfield Poltergeist, and yes, I don't think all of the bits and pieces in that encounter were completely truthful, but there's things that you think, I can't explain that. There's stuff that we become rational for, and stuff that we can understand, but there's an element. I think if we could explain everything, the world would be a much more boring place. If we knew everything there was to know and we could explain every phenomena in every single way, life would be much more dull. And I love this idea. There's still, even now with the age of the internet and the age of fakery and Photoshop and the age of kind of audio distortion, all these things we can do now, there's still certain things we go, can't explain that. And there's something still there that we're and even if we explained everything, I think that's not much fun at all. There still needs to be a mystery to the world in many ways.
There is. And speaking of mysteries now, I mean, we're seeing a quite an important scene where the mother's going to attempt to retrieve Carol Ann by going into the flashy light.
Yeah, the flashy light. Go into the light, don't go inside. It gets very confusing. And I find the idea of and Tangina's misdirection in this scene is quite... does she know what she's doing? I don't think she does. In all honesty, I think she makes it up as she goes on. She gives the impression that she knows exactly what's happening, but I think if you watch this film, this is the most important. The kissing, this is the important things. Much as Tangina has powers, much as Lesh is a scientist.
The family's love is the strength.
It is. It's a thing that pushes them forward. And again, when they're completely stripped of everything, they are still a family, apart from Dana. But I feel the hugs, the kisses, these are the things that bring the family together. This is the thing that defeats both in this film with having the Beast and Kane in the next film, their family and their. And you mentioned this with Spielberg, saying that the family is the most important thing. Yeah. But this is a coherent, loving family. This isn't a family that is disjointed or angry or angsty. This is a family that works together really, really well. And it's again that they are nice people that you would like to be friends with. They seem to put a good dinner party on in many ways. But Tangina, is she a fraud? No. Does she know a lot about the spirit world? Yes. Does she know what's going on here? I don't think so. I think she's making it up as she goes along.
Question: does she know a lot? Does she know a bit about the spirit world and imagines a lot of the rest of it? Is she an expert with a little bit of knowledge?
I think that's probably going to be the case. I think again, I don't want to go back to the remake of this. I think that's similar. The similar character that they've the live TV shows and the bits and pieces that he's done. And again, if you guys are in the States, have you seen Most Haunted as a TV show in the UK? I think that's very similar. That people like Fred Bratt who are fantastic. We don't know things, and again, if we knew everything, there wouldn't be any fun in it. I don't think. But the characters in that show make that show because they are experts in this field. But I think they don't know anything because no one does. And I think this idea of understanding spirituality and understanding things that aren't rational and we can comprehend and understand are quite fascinating to see. And I think again, Tangina in this, she doesn't know what she's doing. It's there you go, amazing effects, brilliant visual effects, just fantastically kind of put together, just very clever use of light, use of sound, and just physical practical effects. Again, the matte painting on this, Rebirth. Again, this is again a thing I discussed in the book. This is a very feminine film. This is a film that's much as there's a lot of masculinity in the film, helping and assisting in this kind of area. The film is driven by femininity, by females, and by women. You will notice it's Dana, Carol Ann, and Diane, Lesh, and Tangina. They're the people who drive this forward.
I know a lot of people have love for Tangina, but I think she's relatively passive in the movies, to be honest. In the sequel, in number 2, we definitely see the Indian character, spoilers, who helps them. He has an element of being able to combat Kane. Yeah. He has powers.
He can do something. He's been trained in things that maybe Tangina hasn't been. I can see her being a flower power 60s, 50s, 60s, maybe a psychic. Maybe she's very similar to how Whoopi Goldberg's character in Ghost is. There's a family connection there, that she is attuned, Doris Stokes-esque to the spirit world, but understands it, but has no power to counteract it or to confront it in many ways. I'd like to know.
I'm just taking this scene here from her character. She's looking for a bit of there's a big element of vanity in her character here.
You're going,
it's like, I've solved the problem.
Yeah, you've solved the problem for about a bit, and there's another 25 minutes of the film. Again, coming back to when I watched this as a kid, I thought, this is it. It's finished now. 1 hour 32 in, give or take. I thought that's the end of the film. Brilliant. that's it. Thank you. Wasn't that scary? Cheers, mum and dad. Thank you for the guy who got the video from me, from the dodgy guy with the van. That's it. The film's finished. Wasn't that lovely? Okay, that's really enjoyable. What a nice little hour and a half. No, there's still 20+ minutes to go.
Yeah.
2 directors, duality of the film, 2 endings, and you just go. Toby Hooper's went, it's my turn now.
Well,
let's
Carla's
crank
saying,
things up a little
how
bit.
soon are they moving? The next day, Carla, I'd be packing up to move the night. Right, got the daughter back. Right, we're out of here. Not coming back.
Oh, you came back. Thanks. Yeah, that scene we did.
Yeah.
What happened last night? Oh, I wasn't here.
I would pay for one of those professional mover firms that goes in and just packs everything on your behalf.
Yeah,
So
I'm
you don't
going.
have to go back yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, let's have another night here. No, let's not do that as a thing. That's the thing we don't want to do. The thing we was going to, but it is I mean, this the next 20 minutes, it's relentless. It's dun 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 dun, and it gets horrific, and it's a great ending to the film. But I think we're out. We're going. We're not here anymore. Unfortunately, we're just going to go off.
Well, Sparky John, one of our producers here, raises a great point here. The norm for 80s movies is normally 90 minutes. That would normally be it. So this movie basically had a bit of a zinger or zinger in it. That when you were watching this in the theatre, in the cinema, you'd think, oh, we're 90 minutes in. You're just over 90 minutes. Oh, but that's so it's wrapping everything up. Get ready.
We're doing it.
I can go for that wee you're busting for to go to the toilet.
Yeah,
and we're good. But in reality, no, you've actually got another 20 minutes to go.
Yeah, it's 2 hours in a cinema. Go in, clean up, get everything sorted out, put trailers on, put ads on, hour and a half. And if it had finished and does finish now, you go, that wasn't a bad movie. Realistically, as an ending, that's worked. They've confronted the malevolence and the evil. They've recombined the family. Craig T. Nelson's had a bit of a sleep and done his hair and had a bit of a shower.
I don't know if you noticed, but the mother's hair's actually starting to turn white.
Yeah, she's got a nice grey streak just down there. She's been to the other side. And she looks pretty good. And she's a fantastic actress in this. She's not objective. She, in a sense, she's not objectified in this film.
No.
She's very attractive, and she's a very attractive mom in this. And a lot of 80s moms are. Dee Wallace being one of them in E.T. But she's not objectified in this. But it does get a little bit questionable, shall we say, in the scenes coming up, and it gets. Again, if you read the book and read the background a little bit more, the scene and the description of that, compared to what we see on screen, is slightly more graphic, and it's slightly more entity-like, shall we say? If anybody's ever watched The Entity, there's a slightly more kind of graphical description to what happens in the scene where she goes up the barrel. But she also changes her clothes. In the first beginning of the film, she has very, very short shorts on, and she's got very kind of long, lithe legs. But now she's looking more mom-esque, if you know what I mean. So she's become a slightly more conservative in the way she's putting things together. But I think it's a good movie. It's a good transition. She's moved away from the kind of look how amazing it is from going from one side of the kitchen to the other.
Let me just interrupt for a second there. I wouldn't be putting them back in that bedroom.
No,
overnight.
Here you go, kids. No, you're sleeping with me downstairs.
With the clown.
Yeah, we packed all your toys away, apart from this one, because this is what you get. No, that's the one I really hate. There you go. The rest of the house, you've got a headless doll, and you've got some bits and pieces. All your collectible Star Wars and stuff is there. Hopefully, it's kept the packaging, because of course it'd be worth more, so you can press them all later on and get them CCG'd and things. But he's got his Han Solo blaster there. But yeah, we packed mostly toys away. We're just going to keep that clown that you love so much. It's like, no.
Yeah. It's a bit odd in that respect.
Yeah.
But also, this is going back to something about the family. I don't think all the traits of the mother and the family and their consumerism are gone there, because the mother is actually displaying some vanity.
Yeah, she's going to dye her hair and things.
Dye her hair because she seems to think that's... So obviously in the aftermath of dealing with all this stuff, she thought it important enough to go out to the store to buy the correct hair dye, etc.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he has got his... I never noticed that before. He has got his Darth Vader head collectible things.
Well, he actually had a Han Solo pistol as well. He was playing with.
Yeah, so he's got some bits and pieces. That's some good stuff. He had some rich parents. I mean, that was you're going to get one of those. That's you're going to get an at happy birthday.
She needs to stop chewing on Luke Skywalker.
Because it's
you chewed on the lightsaber. That's the bit you shoot the kids.
If she's chewing on a Boba Fett with the official launch thing, don't chew on that. That's worth A lot of cash. It will be in 40 years' time. It's a highly collectible piece. It's got Yoda there as well. Yoda should assist him and help out. There he is. There. Poor Luke.
Yeah.
Gets whipped apart by Wampa and gets chewed up by a little girl in this movie. But
there's a bit to look out for from Carla, our amazing producer here. Did you know at around 1 hour 40 minutes, so just over a minute after the cutaway to Robbie and the clown, Diane gets attacked. If you look closely at the photographs in the background, the middle picture of Carol Ann has changed into that of a demonic creature.
I did not know that. I shall
look keep an eye out for that.
Thank you very much,
Carla.
Indeed.
You are a superstar.
Thank you very much indeed. This is great stuff. And then there's so many. I mean, that's why I love talking to people like this and talking to yourselves, because I've seen this film a lot. I've had to see this film a lot. I've had to critique and analyze and take things apart. And somebody will still come out with something completely new and different. And it's great because people do, and it's a lovely shared community thing, because people see themselves as an expert or something. I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who really likes a movie, same as anybody else who's written a book about or done a documentary about things. And the fact that people go, did you know this happens? No, I didn't know this. And it's great because the more you know, the more you're interested in it, the more you want to go and find out bits and pieces. And we talked about the documentary before and saying In Search of Darkness Part 1 and Part 2. These are films that I documentary I love. And the clown, it's got to be the clown thing. Here you go. It's not there. It's going to be there. There you go.
Keeping an eye. Look at the pictures.
So the pictures of Carol on the right-hand side.
It would be the middle one, apparently.
Middle one, yeah.
We'll see. Oh. Oh. Yes, it has. It has. It's changed. Oh. Wow. I mean, this is such a simple but amazing effect they've used in several horror movies, which is using the rotating.
Yeah, there's
rotating room.
It's like a sort of mouth with a yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness me! I've never noticed that before. Thank you ever so much for that. I didn't notice that. But yeah, it's just a clever, a fantastic effect. It just works really well. And just even the doors opening and things happen. But I didn't, honestly, I've seen this film so often, I've never noticed that before. So thank you ever so much indeed for that one, because that's just something that I'll notice next time. It's the same as is it still there? It is. Look, it's like a face. It looks like an old person.
I'm not sure. It looks a bit like, it looks like a distorted version of Zelda almost.
Yeah, it's quite weird. And all these little bits and pieces with movies I love. Again, I'm sure people know about the ghost kid in Theme and Baby. About the idea of that, and the guy from Teen Wolf. If you don't know, have you know about that?
I know the Teen Wolf guy. The ghost in Three Men and a Baby, though, is actually seen earlier in the movie. It's just a cardboard cutout.
It's a cardboard cutout. Yes,
that features earlier in the movie.
Yeah, but I just the idea of law and I love that effect, and that the creature is so well put together. It's just it's a great. It just moves like a completely alien creature. It's not like and then you get this just electric shock. After that, you go pushing her back, and you're not going to go anywhere. And there's just things in we don't need big effects. We don't need massive CGI. We just need the fact that a spark off that, you're not going to go up the stairs. You need a lot of KY jelly and silica to do these kind of effects, and a lot of lights. And again, these scenes are amazing as well. Just the idea that she's trying to help, and no one's really bothered about helping her out. This is a very insular family. You mentioned about the kids not going to school and no one going to work. No one's helped them, and no one helps them. No, he's not talked to the neighbours. He's not talked to anybody else. This is something that
is it a shame thing, or is it the neighbours are like, we'll keep ourselves to ourselves?
Yeah, it seems to be that it seems to be we are. Once we close the doors, this is our family. We don't want to get involved with anybody else. We don't want to talk to anybody else. We don't want to
It's
be involved.
that faux community thing that goes with the whole thing. If you think about the supposed original old communities of old towns where everyone would get involved, it was a genuine, organically grown community. This artificial town, it's the false sense of community that they've created with this estate that shows the underlying values aren't even really there.
It is. There's no sense of community. So there's no sense of you've got this white picket fence space, but it's the space. It's me. I don't need to interact with anybody. The reason I'm going out to the suburbs is I don't want to be with other people, and I can close my doors, and that's it. And you're right. It's very sort of Stepford Wives-esque. This is my perfect life that I'm living myself. These scenes again. We are horrific and very kind of Toby Hooper-esque, but they're also very Steven Spielberg-esque. Again, we've talked about Raiders being quite dark and nasty films. The skeletons, there's this debate whether or not the skeletons are real. Again, the research I found is the fact that they are, and they were real, because they were medical skeletons from India imported in, and they weren't plastic at all, and they were real bodies, and they were real skeletons that had been dressed to be gory. They came, I think, as pure skeletons, but they were used for medical purposes. They were used, but it was cheaper to buy medical skeletons that were used for.
Which you wouldn't do that now in a movie. If you were to make a movie like that now, the bandwagon of justice online would, without, let's not get into any politics or anything, but quite rightly, the bandwagon of sort of social justice we have now would say, what the hell are you doing?
What are you doing with that? Again,
disrespectful to the people whose bodies that is, and their families.
You're going to be dressed up again and come out of a swimming pool in a 1980s movie. It just doesn't work. It's a really kind of bad thing to think about. That's how you films are done. We are, I've said before, checks and balances. We are in a much more conformed way of doing things, and there's no way you'd cut corners. There's no way you go, well, that's fine. The scene again before with that, I think people were slightly more afraid of the fact that they had mud and wet and rain and a swimming pool, and lots of electrical cabling around, because of course they have to film it out at night. So there's lots of rigging and things like that. Of course, a lot of it will be done within the confines of a studio now. But there's of course there's a lot more involved with the CG and post-production doing things. But this is all done. A lot of it is done in camera. And there's a scene just before this where she's running down the corridor, a contra-zoom scene, which again is used in Jaws. Again, it's just all done in camera. There's no post-production involved. That's just there's a corridor, and we just do an effect that allows us to get that in camera. And it works. Yes, that the house is a set inside, but I think the idea of having the outside backlot of a swimming pool dug in a garden with skeletons coming out of it and wires and cables and lighting, it's pretty dangerous. There's bits and pieces that you think I wouldn't do that.
It really is. But the other thing I would say is, something I struggle with in this film. If I was the father in this film,
I wouldn't have left.
First, I wouldn't have left the family, and also right now, I wouldn't be having this argument with the boss about moving the bodies or whatever. I'd be fighting tooth and nail to get in and save my family.
Yeah, I would not. I'd be not kind of not thinking, oh my god, you did this. It's like the kids are going to get traumatized from this. This is not pleasant things and nice things that kids are going to do. But you wouldn't shout and argue with him. The hydraulics
maybe afterwards, but not now.
Yeah. He's got other things to sort about. He's got Night of the Living Dead to sort out in a few years' time. He's going to be worrying about opening up canisters that he shouldn't have been opening. I love that film as well. But but the scene, the hydraulics of things, and just the things getting pushed out of the floor, and all that kind of just use of practical effects. You can see the mud and the dirt. Things are being pushed and compressed down. They're getting pushed out by hydraulics and by presses and things, and by just coming out and things exploding. And it's we again not difficult effects to do on site, but they're not things that we don't need $1 million worth of computers to do it. We were doing it because we have dirt and muck and plastic skeletons, and they're not plastic skeletons. Just this scene as well, just things like that. Just coming to the car and says it's all just designed to be, a well put together and a well paced scene. And what has she been doing? Where's she been?
Well, you can see she's been out on a date with it seems to be a young man, another girl, and another young man has been on a double date, and she's got a love bite on her neck.
Massive big love bite. Yeah, a big kind of.
You can sort of see that she's obviously been out. Again, that's something you do have to question the parenting here. That your family's just been reunited after your daughter.
Yeah, and we're going to move out tomorrow. Okay, go out with your friends for this evening and do whatever.
Well, Carl just says amazing. The original ending of the film had Carol Ann be possessed by the ghost and abandoned by her family and left to die as the house burns down, leading to the entire neighborhood becoming a literal ghost town.
The entire the book has that she the entire the house gets compressed into a vacuum now, but the entire it's not just this, it's big. It becomes Raccoon City towards the end. It becomes a very big possession. It becomes not just one house, it becomes the entirety of the neighborhood, and it becomes very dark and quite sinister. It's the fact that a lot of the other houses, all the bodies rise up out the graves and all those kind of bits and pieces as well. So yeah, but again, Carol Ann's not there's a slight difference between obviously the end of this, which is slightly more upbeat, and the gag at the end, compared to the book, which is slightly more sinister and stuff in many ways as well. So but he doesn't care. Oh my goodness me, think of all the money I'm going to lose. But again, coming back to the 80s, is the real monster, the real creature, not the poltergeist and not the beast. It's the fact that we've got this corporate, faceless corporation cutting corners. You know, realistically, negligence on a massive scale. And the horror is the fact that computer says no, we are stuck behind corporate desks. So your call is important to us. So the real monster is actually a very human monster. It's the fact that it isn't the creatures, and it isn't that the lack of families losing parents. It's the fact that corporate America and the idea of kind of faceless corporations are the things that drive for profit and money, sort of thing, in many ways.
Exactly. I mean, there's even a clue to something about the reveal about that town in the name of it. That community is called, my Spanish is not good, it's Cuesta Verde, which means green slope in English.
Yeah. It's not particularly exciting, is it? Just if you get green place and green slope, it's not very exciting, but it sounds good, doesn't it? It's like San Diego. That sounds amazing. It's and you put that in, but again, you're not selling it to Hispanic people. You're selling it to gullible middle class white people. That sounds really exotic, doesn't it?
You're selling them the dream.
That's it, and you're not selling
them an idea. You're not selling them a home. You're selling them an idea or a dream. You're selling them a fantasy.
Yeah, it's an artificial place for you to go to. And as the end credits run, look out for Toby Hooper's name, or not, as the case is.
It's. I mean, this is a phenomenal film. It's so great. I mean, it's Kathleen Kennedy. This is pre-Amblin, pretty much. It's Spielberg through and through. It is absolutely brilliant. But thank you for joining us, Rob, as we go through the credits. We'll just discuss the last few minutes. If anyone's got any questions in the Discord community for Rob while we've got him here, please ask them. But I mean, this is such a great movie. Thank you for joining us. I mean, how many times have you actually seen this movie now?
In the past couple of years, about 5 or 6 times. So, but it's not sitting there watching it as we've just done now, which has been a pleasure to actually watch in many ways, because again, it's been fantastic talking to yourself and doing it this way. But I've stopped and started, and I've rewound things, and I've looked at things, and even that, I think. So thank you very much to the audience who have mentioned and noticed things that I hadn't done before. And I sat there and I've rewound this, and I've put this back on again. Rewind like it's a video, but I've gone through scenes and I've gone through stuff, and I've picked up bits and pieces. So sitting and watching it, I probably have sat and watched it 6 or 7 times. But again, it's occasionally when you do something like this and you go, well, okay, what about the themes of this? And you watch it again, and you're not interested in what happens. You're not interested in the VFX. You're interested in the things like the structure of the family, or the kind of hierarchy of the female and feminine characters within the structure of this as well. So you're looking at it from different points of view, and different perspectives. So again, I mentioned in the book the idea of Wizard of Oz, and the fact that we have this 25-30 minutes worth of film that's very realistic, and then you suddenly have this tornado that blasts through their house, and you end up in down the Yellow Brick Road. It all becomes very fantastic, or becomes the urban fantastic instead. So again, I was looking at it from the point of view of at what point in that film does it go from being normal as an everyday life to being this completely different phenomena that doesn't happen to people or to anything. So it's all doing things like that. So I've seen it a lot, and again, I mentioned before that I've seen this many times, and going back to when I was 8, so I've probably seen it more times than I should. And of course, there's the second film as well, which I really do like. But again, it's a go-to movie. I'll watch this probably once or twice a year just because of the enjoyment and pleasure of just watching it. And it's the same with other films. The Thing is another one I would watch again and again
exactly.
and again.
We have a great community question from Carla in our community here, which is, when is your book coming out in America, and will it be available in America?
Okay, yes, I think it will. I hope it does. I know that it'll be June 2022. So it comes out. So it's actually with the publishers at the moment. So John Atkinson, who's my publisher, actually has that. And if you can't get it in the States, drop us an email. I'm sure we can get a copy across to you over there anyway. So there's both the hardback book and the softback. And the thing about Devil's Due, again, I'm not having things on just on standby, but it's about that big. The books are quite small, so they're not big, thick, telephone directory size books. They're kind of introductory books to academia, I think is probably the best way of putting it. So there's probably far better theorists out there than me, and far better people who've written books about film, and they're usually big, chunky things, 170,000, 200,000 words. The book is 70 to 80,000 words cut back and abridged and things in many ways, but it's not a you need to know everything there is to know about Italian horror or anything to do with 1950s horror. It's Poltergeist. It's an 80s movie. Let's see what themes we can pick out and draw out of it and stuff in many ways. So it's on for pre-order from Amazon.co.uk at the moment. But I'm more than happy to drop that address to people. But you should just have to find my name. So I'm not trying to plug anything just yet because it's not out yet.
No, you're more than welcome. It's been wonderful. Thank you for having you as a guest. But we're just drawing to an end now. So I just want to say to everybody, thank you, Rob, for joining us for a
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Party.
Thank you so much indeed. It's been fantastic to sit with other people and to go through a film that I really do enjoy. But now that I know that you guys do this, I'll more than hopefully see you guys again, and I'll be part of the audience to throw crazy questions out to everybody else who's the next guest.
Well, that's wonderful. If you can hang around for a moment anyway, Rob. Just to say to everybody, we will be back with horror in 2 weeks' time with, of course, Poltergeist Part 2. Who knows what further wacky adventures the family will get up to. We will see. But next week, we will be back with our In Search of Tomorrow's sci-fi community to carry on with our Star Trek story, where we will be seeing the search for Spock. Does Spock return? Who knows? I hope so. But anyway,
I think he does, doesn't he?
Spoilers. Anyway, everyone take care, and we will see you next week for sci-fi and horror the week after. So bye-bye.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.